Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and today we are going to be taking a look at leaked video of an IED ambush in Kherson by Ukrainian Special Forces. And I'm going to break down just what makes an IED such an effective tool in combat. Let's get into it. So this is, again, titled Ukrainian Forces Ambush Russian Typhoon, which is a type of MRAP with improvised road bomb. In the U.S., we call them IEDs, improvised explosive devices. So I'm just going to point out there. Okay. So that is, let's see, we're going to zoom it in again and seeing it here, right? So what's interesting to me first off is that it looks like, based on this much slower video, that there's actually two explosions. You can see here, this is probably det cord. So there's an explosion here, right? And then there's this trail here. This is oftentimes, there is basically a thin cord of C4 that if you want to detonate, say, artillery rounds without firing them, you will use something like that. And then of course the primary explosive is right there, right on the crosshair. So let's see, maybe we'll see this one more time. Again, to the YouTube censors, there's nothing here that violates YouTube terms of service. It's not even clear from this video that they have actually destroyed the MRAP. Those things can take a beating and keep on rolling. So you can see it wasn't destroyed. It may not have even been a direct hit. So what makes an IED so dangerous? Well, let's break it down. First off, there was a belief in the early Iraq war that the best way to deal with IEDs was to go outrun them, go as fast as possible. And it seems like that's what this vehicle here is doing. It's moving at a really high rate of speed. But what the US found is that actually driving slower allowed the crew of the vehicle to detect things like tripwires, IEDs, etc. So it could actually be a much better solution to drive slower and try to be more aware. So the Ukrainian forces here have what looks like a targeting reticle setup, though this may have been added in post-production, since obviously either the camera is looking down the optic or the actual combatant is. And you obviously want the combatant to look down the reticle. What is more common for IEDs is to use what are sometimes called natural aiming stakes. So a good example of a natural aiming stake might be, you see this grove of trees here, right? So what they may have said is, hey, when the vehicle passes by this tree, between this tree and this tree, is the right angle, it means that the IED is lined up, right? They may have added this whole crosshair in post-production. So you can see here, right, as soon as the truck drives by that first tree trunk, they know, hey, it's time to detonate it. Now, what they will often do, there's different ways of detonating an IED. There are cell phones are one of the most common, right? U.S. forces had a really hard time dealing with IEDs detonated via cell phone, but there's a problem, and that means that oftentimes commercial cell phones, they're not instantaneous, right? You hit dial, it goes to the nearest tower, bounces back, goes to the next phone, and then that phone triggers the explosive of the IED. Well, that means that there can be a 1 or 2 second delay, and you can see in this video, right, again, that a delay of 1 second would actually dramatically affect how direct your hit was. So, excuse me. So what you would do often is wait for a stationary vehicle. You would, for example, let's say put some sort of barrier, like a fallen tree, for example, across the road here. Then this vehicle would have to stop or at least slow down to drive around the tree. Well, once it's stopped or slowed down, inside the kill zone, right, designated by the two tree trunks upright, then you would detonate the IED, and it wouldn't be a big deal that there was a 1, maybe 2 second delay. If you want an instantaneous IED, two ways to do that are, first were pressure plates. Pressure plate IEDs were when the vehicle would drive over a metal plate, it would compress a spring, and that the plate would contact another metal plate, completing a circuit, detonating the IED. The problem with that system is that, yes, it will detonate on an enemy vehicle, but it would also detonate on friendly vehicles. So if your goal is to minimize collateral damage, which unfortunately I'm here to tell you, the Taliban were not real big into minimizing civilian collateral damage, well, then you end up with, you may also just waste your weapon systems, right? Why would you waste your explosives on a civilian target, even if you didn't really care about minimizing civilian damage? Now, what is the other method is called command wire. Command wire is the simplest. You just run a copper wire all the way to your detonator, and when you're ready, you just hit the button, the electric signal travels down the copper wire and detonates the IED. It's pretty instantaneous. That's probably the preferred method, but copper wire is visible and it forms just a nice little trace right to your location. So if they stop and see the copper wire, then they're going to look up and they're going to see right where the other end of that copper wire is, which is your position. So all in all, it's tough to say. I don't think the Russians have some of the countermeasures that U.S. forces did. These include things like radio signal jammers and infrared blockers, and even a roller in front of the vehicle to set off pressure plate IEDs prematurely. But you don't need to, right? It seems like they may have had some remote detonation. They may have actual technology so it's not an improvised IED. Well, they say it's improvised. Okay, so I guess by definition it is. But they may be able to use existing military technology, like say a claymore or a remote mine of some kind, to sort of make the detonation more reliable. Now, what makes this so effective as a tactic is that to counter it, you have to change the way you conduct these operations. So suddenly these lone vehicles shouldn't really operate on their own, because look, if there was 3 vehicles in the convoy, then other vehicles could tow this one, they could help the crew, treat their wounds, evacuate them if necessary. So now, instead of having to run just one vehicle to and from a place, you have to run 3. The other problem is that it means that you have to divert resources away from your front line to clearing this road, right? Because if you've been hit there once, there's a good chance you'll be hit there again. So suddenly, instead of having your, say, drones, flying over enemy formations, you have to send those drones over your own backfield roads. It can really, really become a waste of resources. Sometimes if you don't have enough drones, for example, you may literally have to have units dedicated to doing nothing but driving up and down these roads, making sure they're free of IEDs. So it can be a really change the way fighting happens, especially in the backfield. So again, this is near Kherson in the south of the country. But I hope you guys learned something about IEDs, why they're effective weapons, not just in Ukraine, but in a lot of different modes and places of warfare, right? They just are so effective, even beyond their ability to deal damage to equipment and personnel. Anyway, guys, if you want me to break down some videos that are even more controversial, that are even more spicy, that YouTube won't let me monetize, you want to become a patron of Patreon. Thanks to my Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys make this happen. I'll see you in the next one.